Hey everyone, I'm happy to be with you all. I'm Patty Burgess of doingdeathdifferently.com and teaching transitions. And on the other side of the world from me is Misty Lynn, my awesome co-host, and together we are the Death Chicks. It's an unlikely name, but well, the fact is that we are two chicks talking about death, dying, grief, and loss. And in my world, it doesn't get any better than that. And you're probably thinking, get a life. That's probably what you're thinking. So we have a fabulous guest today who is back by popular demand, and that is Austyn Wells. And I'm going to have Missy do a proper introduction, but she is awesome, Austyn. Say that 10 times real fast. And every time you're around, Austyn, I smile. I'm even laughing whenever I'm with you. You just have like that effect. It's like the Austyn effect, like the Oprah effect or something, for sure. Anyway.
I hear you, Patty. I hear you.
All right. I love it. I love it.
Really glad to have Austyn back. Really glad. And we might be stepping on each other a bit. This is a bit of the Arctic connection, so sometimes there's a lag. So I'm in the Arctic, Patty's in Philly, Austyn's over in LA. So we have 3 oceans covered. So somewhere in that triangle, we hope you are. Now, Austyn Wells. Austyn's a spiritual medium. And I love this. She's a soul gardener, and I grew up gardening, and the idea of planting seeds and watching them grow resonates with me. So Austyn empowers individuals to create soul-centered lives, and I love that she combines her mediumship with grief counseling, with indigenous energy medicine, and with sacred ceremony. And we're going to get a bit into that as soon as I pass it over to Austyn, because she's been studying how different cultures grieve and how the ritual and the ceremony around grieving can help to move us forward. So just a little bit more about her, and then we'll jump right into that. In 2012, psychic medium John Edward invited Austyn to host her own weekly show on his spiritual website, and you can find that on Infinite Quest. She's also been a guest medium for the California State Spiritualist Convention and an educator and medium at many annual conferences, including the wonderful Afterlife Awareness Conference, and we've interviewed Terry Daniel, the lead for that. She's also worked with the Edgar Cayce's Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. So those are just a few of the many things Austyn has been involved with. You can find more about her at her site, austynwells.com, and that's AUSTYN. That's very feminine spelling of Austyn. I love it. And the last thing before we jump in is that Austyn's developed what's called the Divine Spark cards. And these assist both developing mediums as well as grief counselors to inspire healing conversations with their clients. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Austyn, and just with that Spanish adieu, I'll jump in there with Dia de los Muertos. And when I was speaking Spanish, I loved it. It feels so good in the mouth. And muerto, even though it means death and dead, muerto, there's a visceral feel with that word that I think speaks to the beauty that can be found within the death space when we have the courage to go there. So over to you, Austyn.
Hello, ladies. It is such an honor to be back with Miss Patty and Miss Misty. Thank you for having me back. And especially, this is such an incredible time of year to be having a conversation about death. I have, for a number of years, hosted an event around Dia de los Muertos, which means Day of the Dead. Now, there are many traditions around the world that celebrate or give a time period of the year where we can mourn. And it's not seen necessarily as a sadness. I think it's just seen as an opportunity to revisit the memories and to appreciate and validate, if you will, that person's existence in your life and how you might be slightly different because of their life. So what I love about Dia de los Muertos is, first of all, it takes place over 2 days. It corresponds with the All Saints Day, which is a Catholic tradition. but it's November 1st and November 2nd. November 1st is allocated or dedicated to the children, or they call the angels. Why that gets me, but it does. I do a lot of work with parents that have lost kids, so I think I can feel the kids when they're being touched into. But anyway, so the first day is celebrating the children that are in the spirit world, and then November 2nd is celebrating the other ancestors that have joined them. And it's colorful, it's playful, it's joyous, it's whimsical. Yes, I suppose there are elements of sadness with it, but the capture of it is joyous.
Wow.
And I can keep going about it, but I love our conversations, so I also want to open it up to the three of us having a discussion about it as well too.
Well, I love that, Austyn, because it's so true in our culture that when somebody even says the word grief or death or dead or dying, all of a sudden there's a kind of a posture that we take. Our eyes might get averted. We go to this culturally kind of incited posture or stance. And it's sad to me because there is a celebration. There is joy in celebrating grief and the dead, and we don't seem to see it that way, and here in Western cultures much. And I think, if we can approach it with like the kind of like our mutual friend Terry Daniel talks about, grief as a mystical journey. There can be a lot of joy and celebration in that. There can be a lot of learning in that. And then when we can do that, maybe approach it with some curiosity, we get more and a different perspective than we had before. So I think there's a lot we can learn from what you're describing.
I absolutely agree. I mean, even if you look at the customs that happen around that, I'm blessed to live in Los Angeles, and we have an area here which is Olivero Street. And at that point during the year, around this time, they have these kids walking around. Almost many of the Hispanics are walking around with their faces painted like skulls. I have all these pictures, which I would love to share with you, and maybe you can supplement them on your Facebook page or something so people can see what it looks like. But even though they're face paintings of skulls, they're stunning. They're so beautiful. And so then on top of that, they make a memorial, an altar, or a space that's a sacred space to honor their loved ones. They'll have pictures of their loved ones. They'll have marigolds, so those beautiful pops of orange. They'll have foods that they like. They have the pan de los muertos, which is the Day of the Dead bread. They'll have fruits and vegetables also that kind of fill it out. But where I really am so entertained by it is it's whimsical. They have their favorite alcoholic beverages. They have their favorite candy, because their assumption is during that time, like you said on your site, when the veils are open, that they're co-mingling with us, so they're aware of what our actions are. And as a medium, I absolutely know they don't need November 1st and 2nd to be able to do that. They do that anyway. But it's this awareness of allowing ourselves to entertain the fact that we are supported at all times. So it's really lovely, and it's also an atonement, certainly. Yom Kippur is a time period that the Jewish faith looks into their souls and say, what could I do differently, and how could I have acted differently? There's a component of that. But to bring that, Patty, what you were talking about with that moroseness that comes with grief, I think it's because we don't give space and place for it to have a time. So then we wait for us to overwhelm us. We wait for it to be so thick that then we have to pay attention to it. But I love this yearly tradition, and Mexico certainly isn't the only country that does it. There's traditions all over the world. There's in Nepal, so in India, where cows are very, very sacred. At this time of the year, families that have lost an ancestor will walk with their cow in the village. And if they don't have a cow, or they're not wealthy enough to have a cow, they will have their children dress up as cows. And the idea is that they're allowing the cows to be the escorts of their loved ones to the spirit world, of saying, let me help you with this, because they see the cows that way. And then in China, They have an entire month, this is what the Buddhists and the Taoists celebrate. It's an entire month of it. So they start with a parade, and then they end up putting lanterns on water. So they have many different traditions. Now, what's interesting about the Chinese approach to it is that there's still a palpable fear of death, because a lot of them don't go out at night during the month of, I think they call it the Hungry Ghost Month. They don't go out during that month because they're worried that the souls of the dead are going to come and get them. But, you know, for them, it's balancing that fear with festival. So I'm certainly not mocking them and being afraid of it, but, you know, our fear of ghosts, our fear of the dead is palpable, and it's not something that's just within our culture, it's around the world.
And I think it's brilliant that that other cultures like to have a whole month dedicated to that. Comparatively, we tend to kind of close doors around it, and just the opening and the publicly recognizing, you know, people are dead and they have passed on, and to marry celebration with that, and the whole concept of honoring the dead, and instead of our focus, which is sometimes on our personal loss, if we can shift just a bit to seeing the beauty of what was there, and when we think of the person who's gone, and I work with grieving women a lot on this, and their favorite thing to do is just to remember and talk about them. And what happens often is if they find their courage to go out in public and they bring up their lost husband, and everyone goes, oh, and they bring on the posture that Patty spoke of. And here's a woman, and she's wanting to talk about her loved one, and to share how wonderful he was, and to bring him back to life through the memories and through the celebrating what he was and through the gifts that he brought. And as a culture, sometimes we're not ready to do that. So I think that's a key part of our work, is to bring that life back into death.
Well, and it's a beautiful comment, because I can validate it from a different worldly perspective. When I'm working as a medium and I'm connecting with a soul that's connecting with a soul that's still in the living world or in the physical world, they're not depressed. They're not sad. They're probably the most vital essence of them, because I'm speaking directly to their soul. They don't talk about, they'll talk about their death if it's pertinent, perhaps if there's some healing with it, if the loved one didn't get a chance to say goodbye, if there were certain things done around the time of their death that would be meaningful to the family to know that they're aware of. But really what their conversation is, let's remember, let's go back, let's talk about when our souls danced together in this physical journey of life. And we created this, or, oh my goodness, your children are doing this. And so it's such a joyous conversation that I agree with you. That's, you know, in the Divine Spark cards that I made, I was so fascinated because I'd really made them to expand conversation. So when mediums were thinking, I don't know what to ask the soul, they would have questions that they could ask. But then I found I have families that use them around Thanksgiving, and they just, each one picks a card and they try to remember as many things as they can that correlate with the card and the memories of the person that they're trying to bring into or wanting to be part of Thanksgiving, because that's what the history's been. And then, Misty, to join the other point that you were talking about with the women that you would work with whose husbands are in the spirit world, we don't know how to support somebody that's going through death, through grief. We don't. And in having studied grief counseling, and really always having to keep my license up for different ways, I have to study different modalities. The first year, we're great with people and supporting people that have lost somebody. We will remember, we will ask questions, we'll say things, but like after a year, we're done. We want them to be moving on. We want them to talk about other things. And at the 1 year point and forward, that's when they really need the support, because they've gotten the support, but now they really have to deal with, who am I beyond this association? And that really is with parents that have lost children as much as it is with any of us that have a pivotal person that's no longer in our life. So I really, really understand what you're saying. And I think part of it is, we don't know what to say. So my advice would be to anybody that is surrounding someone, first of all, they want to remember that person, especially a parent that's lost a child. Think of how many times you, Misty, talk about your beautiful daughter. A parent that's lost a child wants to equally do the same thing. So they want that memory, or they want that permission to be a parent that has a child. So I think we can be more considerate, we can be more empathic. And if you don't know what to say, then just say, how are you doing, and what do you remember the most, and how are you doing? Connect with them, because it can be such an invisible feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a barrier too for people to break that uncomfortableness and say, how are you doing? What was your favorite thing about, and naming the person. I find there's a hesitancy to even say the person's name, and sometimes that can give such great comfort to those grieving, because it's like an acknowledgement that that person is still there. And by saying the name, I feel in some sense it almost invites that person in, and wherever they are, maybe they're listening. Austyn, maybe you know much more about this than me, but even that sense, and if we are all energy, and if we say the name, there's something to that.
Well, I think people are unclear how to connect to their loved ones, or they think a medium is really the one that does it. Now, as far as bringing through, messages and those kind of things, yes, a medium is trained to do that. Hopefully trained. But it's you can just the memory. They're aware of it. So think of the fact that their energy, they know when you're thinking about them. So that asking for signs and symbols and just sitting with them, blending with their energy, and you can merely do that, but just like you're saying, there's so much power in a name, and just saying their name out loud and allowing yourself to notice, how does my body feel different when I say their name? Can I actually sense when they're standing next to me? And then give them some homework, have them have some fun. They're waiting for an opportunity to connect to us. So then it's a matter of saying, great, okay, homework, you get to play in my world. So, find some ways to pop in so you will validate the fact that I asked for some attention today or some love.
That's so great. And Austyn, we just don't let any old mediums on here. They're only the trained ones, by the way.
Yeah.
For sure.
The only reason why I say it.
No, it's true.
Well, but the reason why I say it, it has so little to do with the medium and everything to do with the client. And I'm not just talking about the one that the medium sits across from. It's the client in the spirit world too.
Yes, yes.
Because it's a very different language to speak, and your sensitivities and your own personal healing kind of needs to be in order to allow another soul to make impressions, so your own stuff doesn't get in the way of their stuff.
That's really very interesting to hear you say that, because I think that matters. I think that matters in life in general, but obviously much more so if you're bringing through messages through you and interpreting them, because I guess how do you get messages? Through pictures, through audio, or just a variety of ways? And
they call my cell phone.
Oh, well, then that's easy enough.
Oh, wait, Kevin's calling. The cool thing, Patty, is just like you communicate a certain way and Misty communicates a certain way. Each soul that comes through, when a medium develops, their abilities to perceive will be widened and opened. So as a medium that's been working for 10 or 15 or 20 years has a different sense grab, perhaps, than someone that's kind of straight out of the gate. So I find that if we look at my senses like a musical instrument, each one plays, each soul that connects with me, some play tuba, some play clarinet, so they're going to utilize my system differently. And if they were a very powerful soul, they might use my vision more, or my clairsentience more, my feeling more. And if they were a little bit more demure, I might just hear what they're saying. It really depends. It's like they all have, as we would expect, an individual way of presenting things.
And to your point, that the information that you're getting, you need to be fairly cleaned up so that that doesn't provide static, I guess, for lack of a better term, in being able to bring forth these messages clearly without your stuff attached. And I think that's beautiful, and it feels very responsible too, because we don't always know that when we're meeting with somebody. But I did want to go back just for 1 second about when you were talking about the experiences in other cultures, not way back, but why do you think in this culture it has ended up that we don't have a Day of the Dead, we don't even have a celebration, we tend to grieve maybe in isolation, and only, well, not only, but for the most part, I'm talking culturally here with a broad brush, you know, unless someone's reaching out for that help, it's hard for others to reach in. How do you think we got here this way, where is it we're not as ancient a civilization, so to speak, or your thoughts on that?
I think it goes back to the evolution of our own country. Let's go back to the 1800s, shall we, in America?
A little Puritan, maybe?
Absolutely. No, if you're when Abraham Lincoln was born, around the beginning of the 1800s was the advent of the industrial age. And at that point, death happened in the home. We had home funerals. We had a parlor, which was a specific room within the house that was for special occasions like weddings and parties and funerals. If you went to the corner store, you'd pick up milk, you'd pick up soap, and you could pick up a coffin. So it was a way of life. And also the church, most of the communities were very joined also by a singular religion at that point. So Protestantism and those religions were a little bit more prominent. So when somebody died, there were bell tolls. So one bell was one thing and two bells was another. And so the entire community was aware when somebody had died. They also were paraded through the town. So it was visible. They call it visible death because we could actually see it was happening. The game changer of all funky things was the Civil War. Because the Civil War was the first time in our country that we experienced death, profound, awful, brutal death that couldn't be masked. And on top of that, death didn't happen in the community. Now death was happening on a battlefield that was days, if not weeks away from the person's town. So they had to find a way to transport the body back to the town if they could recognize it. So that's when they literally had little tents where they would do embalming. And they were embalming doctors that were literally on the side of battlefields. So once somebody died, they would immediately infuse things in their bodies so they would preserve the physical body so it could deal with the transport. And then, so that started the whole embalming world. And this is really where the funeral world started being born. Then the other advent to it, believe it or not, was Abraham Lincoln. I'm a huge fan of Abraham Lincoln. I'm kind of a history geek. He contributed so much to our country, but he also is a huge proponent in the advent of the funeral industry, because when he died, it was one of the first, there's great comparisons between how the country mourned George Washington when he died and how the country mourned Abraham Lincoln, because George Washington was a ceremonial passing. So he had a private burial at Mount Vernon. So that's where his body was. So he was allowed the private sector of it, but then the public side of him was celebrated in towns and so on and so forth. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, it was a national grief. It absolutely, it took all citizens off track.
Yeah. So
they needed to have the closure of his physical body, and they had the Lincoln train. And his body was taken over a month. I think it was 3 weeks to a month to something like 106 different cities by train so people could see his body. So in order to do that, and remember, he got shot in the head. So we can't see that because we can't deal with death. So that led to makeup artists and people having to learn how do we reconstruct the head or have it lay in such a way that people won't be traumatized by seeing what they're seeing. So then we had to have, you know, it just began this whole industry of funerals. And so people became fascinated with death in kind of a macabre, fascinating way. But that's when death went out of the home, and then hospitals also came into play. So when people got sick, they went to a hospital instead of being treated by a doctor at home. So all of a sudden they created this chasm called invisible death. And that is when I think we really started getting afraid of it because we weren't witnessing it anymore. Then you take television and you take the way it traumatizes us and how much death is just like, and it's massive. Yes. And the people that were affected by 9/11, any of that, and even the people of 9/11, we still talk about it, so they have a hard time getting over their grief. So we lost track then.
That's a really great sort of run through history there. It's really wonderful to be able to tell us how, and that makes total sense. So then ultimately it got medicalized and sterilized, institutionalized, and that makes it harder to connect when it's not happening in one's home.
Yep.
Yep. So yeah, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why Misty and I are here is, you know, we haven't put it that way, but that's kind of the run up to now. I think this new kind of death awareness or death acceptance movement that we're all a part. And what I find interesting is mediums. Remember when I remember, and in fact, I saw you with John Edwards, and I remember back in whatever that was, that must have been the early 90s or something, when he was the first guy on television with his show Crossing Over, and I was riveted. Wasn't even in this business at the time.
Oh yeah.
But I was riveted, and the criticism that man took for his gift. And now on every network, everywhere, you do see these medium shows. I think that's a great advancement personally. And I thank him so much that he had to go through so much of that criticism and that scrutiny that he did. And, you know, maybe that's important anyway, if you're going to say you're going to talk to the dead and you're going to do it as publicly as he did. But I think it's been amazing to watch what's happening now. People are fascinated, but I still think scared.
Yeah, they are. Well, I think there's the scared part I completely understand because we equally spend so much time talking about ghosts. Now, the irony is I'm talking to ghosts all the time.
Yeah.
But I guess they're really scary. That opens up kind of a different conversation because I certainly don't want to tease anybody about a palpable fear about.
No, that's understandable.
However, the soul's in the spirit world. Once the body dies, the soul transitions to the spirit world, and the essence of their soul is available. I think what people experience in hauntings and in ghosts is the memory that resides from the physical experience that still needs to be dealt with in this dimension. It's kind of like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I think in our dimension, we're responsible for everything that happens. So if somebody was killed in a space, of course it's going to have a vibration of that because that was traumatic for the soul. But it doesn't mean that the soul is stuck. It doesn't mean that soul, you know, is in the what do they call it? That in between place, the bardos of consciousness.
Purgatory.
Purgatory, yeah. But there is an aspect that needs evolution, and I think that becomes then our homework as individuals to be able to figure out how can we transform the consciousness so that kind of thing doesn't exist. So it has to exist to raise the awareness, but I don't think it exists in the way that soul is, you know, in purgatory.
Good point.
Mm-hmm. And often the negative association can be linked back, as you said, to this world where the individual may have unresolved business, and that is manifesting as a connection to this experience or to whatever it is, but it's not necessarily connected to the other side. It's just they're making that connection and bringing a dark feel to it. Because everything I've heard about people on the other side and connections with it is always light and bright and beautiful. And I think that's the piece that that mediums can really bring and lend to people who are deeply grieving and who may have tried everything they know of but are still feeling hurt or depressed or whatever it is they're feeling. But grief can bring in some really heavy emotions, and if you're not used to working with emotion and processing it, sometimes that can become your new reality. And I wonder, Austyn, if you could speak about how working with a medium, how this can maybe help some of our listeners who are grieving and stuck move through this process. And maybe that's a story you share, or maybe it's a general synopsis from all the work you've done.
Okay. Thank you. It's a beautiful, beautiful way of framing it. I think there's a stunning opportunity with mediums, but it is not for everybody, and that's okay. Our job is not to convert people to this. It's to be an opportunity for healing. If there is something about the relationship that's unresolved, it's a stunning opportunity to see what is potential with a soul-to-soul conversation. That's what mediumship is. It's two souls having a conversation with a conduit. So most of the time, I have such trust in this spirit world. Someone will come to a medium and they have an expectation of who they want to come through. But oftentimes it's not who comes through, because the person they want to come through may just be like a favorite grandmother. And of course that soul wants to connect. But if we're talking about the evolution of the soul, which is really, for me, the reason why we're here, then it's this amazing opportunity for someone to have their soul rebooted and potentially upgraded software-wise to the next level of what it is that they're attracting. I think grief and death is an amazing opportunity for a person to realize that something in their life has changed and that they're becoming something else, to value what it was the person meant to them, what that person taught them, but then who are they beyond that person and with that person now integrated into the fabric of their soul.
That's lovely. That's really very, very well said. It sort of takes the mystique and the mystery and the woo-woo out of it from that standpoint, because if we are all energy, we are able to do this. It's just that some of us are more practiced than others, you being one of those folks. But, I guess if we were to ask anybody out there, have they ever had a hit of thinking of somebody out of the blue, or something happens to, somebody calls and they were just thinking, whatever that happens to be, we are all connected. We just don't tap in. And what I love about what you say too, Austyn, is that it's not for everybody. You're not here to solicit, bring in souls for this, somebody thinks it's voodoo or something. But I do believe the openness to this new way of looking at things. It's sort of like we were talking about with grief. We can have a new perspective on this. And I personally have seen amazing, almost instantaneous healings for someone who has been grieving for a very long time and doing some work to help themselves and connect. But for whatever that reason is, and the timing was, it happened through a medium. And to see the relief and the release, many times with tears or even body vibrations, is amazing to watch. So it's so powerful, your work, and for the right time. And I think you're also a proponent of, you know, traditional grief counseling, as you said. That's what you do as well. It's not always this kind of quick fix that many people think mediums are.
No, and it's part of the reason why I became, and I'm very proud of being a licensed grief counselor, because within the session, and it's part of the reason why I might work a little differently is that I know that part of the grieving process is the memory of it, is the talking about it, is that nurturing what was about it, because that person contributes to our soul. So there is a missing of the value of what that person brought in, but then there's such an opportunity to understand that value and then find how you can express that and recapture that, in a sense, as your life continues. So it appreciates those divine intersections that occur when some soul touches your life profoundly. And it's also part of the physical life. Being in the soul being in a body, part of the life is loss, because we're dealing with material things. We're meant to lose things. We're meant to have things stolen. We're meant to have that concept of receiving and releasing. And it's on a quantum physics level, on the soul part of ourselves, we're completely connected. But in the physical sense of our reality, we're constantly aware of being separate and losing. So we're not really doing our work, I suppose, if we're not having that expression show up somehow. And I don't really know why I want to bring this up, and this is my intuitive world. Another kind of grief that I don't think gets recognized enough is anticipatory grief. As for instance, my mom is going through some health challenges right now, and there's a lot of us in our genre of life that are dealing with our parents or older affiliates that are in the dying process or have died. And there's a benefit to being aware of how someone is going to die. Let's say they have cancer and that's what their means is. But yet you're actively mourning, knowing the fact that they could die. And I don't think a lot of people that are talking about grief talk about that part of it too, because you end up sometimes thinking more about them dying than being aware of the fact that they're alive and there's somebody that you can talk to. But there's all these potential opportunities when you are in anticipatory grief. I had a great conversation with my mom about what do you want to have happen. I don't think I could have ever had that conversation if I wasn't doing this work. But she told me about a poet I didn't even know of that her father used to read her. And it ended up being this beautiful memory thing for her, and not a scary conversation, but an opportunity for her to shape what would a celebration of her life look like. So I think we just have to be courageous and step into the fear of it and not be afraid of the fact that somebody's dying. We're all going to die. So why don't we, I know there's like death cafes now. There are all sorts of different ways people are talking about it. And it's not morose. I think it's just, it's an awakening. It's a portal of becoming. It's just part of it all.
And there's such potential, like when we shift from the fear into the, hey, it's going to happen, it's on the table. How do you want it to roll out, Mom? What would you like? And when you shift into that, it can really be exciting and opening of the heart and invigorating, because, like you said, Austyn, never before have you really talked about this, unless you're really ahead in the death movement and have been there. But I find that when people begin these conversations, they can. It's almost like a new, like, oh wow, it's like a newfound freedom within. It's like their life gets a little bit bigger because this whole area that was blocked off before has opened up, and we can think about it and we can plan for it, and we can even go so far as to make it fun.
And when you were talking, Misty, earlier about the women that you're working with who are kind of begging for conversations about their husbands, people that are in the dying process need to talk about that. They need
Absolutely.
It's not so much need the opportunity to talk about it, they need the opportunity to be allowed to talk about it. And the only way that's going to happen is they're probably, unless they're incredibly self-realized, and I've seen individuals that are like that, everybody needs a little help. So letting them know that it's kind of a normal thing that might be, and it also gives them a huge piece of comfort because part of the problem with death for us is we're so used to planning the future, which is a joke because we're not in control of it, but nice illusion for all of us. But so we're so used to planning this idea of, okay, I'm going to do this next Tuesday and this next Thursday. And when it comes to death, it's like, well, what's the next thing after that? So in a sense, you're giving them a really fascinating, different sense of comfort. Who do you think you're going to visit when you get to the spirit world? Who would you love to see when you're there? What do you think happens when you die? Is there anything that you haven't finished that you'd like to maybe wrap up before? Is there anything and the other idea I came up with my mom was, I said, you know, my niece is going to be just graduated from college, but she will have things that happen. I said, Mom, write a note to her so I can give it to her when she gets married. That continuity of I'm still part of the living, because what it does is it gives them that sense of joy that they're still participating in life, because it's a huge fear of like, oh, well, next Thursday after that, I don't know what the heck's going to happen. Yay. We're not good with that at all.
Yeah. I heard a really great quote. I was traveling and I conversation with a fellow on the airplane, random, and it was, if you want to make the spirits laugh, tell them your plans.
Yeah, they are probably chuckling for sure. You know, to your point about anticipatory grief, I think that's fascinating. I was just speaking with somebody today who got back in touch after taking one of the courses and was working with her first hospice patient. And she got in touch to say that she was really grieving the loss. She had spent 2 months with this person, and she was really grieving the loss of this person. I wasn't sure if she should take the next patient. Well, one, she probably isn't ready and needs to sit with that for a little bit. But we talked a little bit about, or I sent back a message to talk with her about, you know, when you examine this, could this be this grief, this person that we think it's the person, could it be triggering old grief, or could it be triggering, as you talked about, anticipatory grief? I know for folks who are going through family members with dementia, there's old grief in that, grieving who they lost, the person that they knew. And then the anticipatory grief, it also could be anxiety, because with dementia, it's rather unpredictable. And what is it going to look like when they're gone? When my, let's say, life as a caregiver, that's all I do, and I'm so focused on it, then what? So, you know, in any given scenario, there could be, I love this idea of anticipatory grief, which, as you said, nobody talks about, or triggering old grief. If you could say a little bit more about that.
It's the largest challenge we have is the contrast between the mind and the soul, which are really different aspects of us. All the same person, but we have different components. So the mind, our brain is set up to process information. So it observes something, tries to capture it, define it, so then it can process it. So it makes sense. Anything that we encounter in life, that's what our brain is trained to do, is look at it, process it, file it, let it go, move on to the next thing. When we're dealing with unknowns, which is why I think fear is so prevalent in our culture right now, is because we're really supposed to be looking at, is fear real, or is it just what we don't know that we need to approach differently? So from a mental perspective, grief can be dreadful. From a soul perspective, it's a slightly different conversation. There's reasons that souls are connected. There's healing potentials. There are continual conversations because the soul is immortal. So if there's not a sense of loss, it's just the visual of the physical body no longer being the container of the essence of the person's soul. So when we're dealing with anticipatory grief, it's our mind really, and I think our ego and everything that's the sense of who we are with that person. Because most of the time with grief, also when somebody dies, there's a very specific role we've been playing with that individual. So when that person dies, we don't know who to be that person, that way we are with that person anymore, which is why so oftentimes, especially if it's a complicated situation or a complicated relationship, we'll look to project onto the next person that's kind of like that person, the old relationship we had with the person who died, because we're having such a hard time letting go of that role we play. But again, all of those things can be transmuted from a soul perspective, because then we see the death as an opportunity to look at that aspect of ourselves that does that kind of role play and say, what is the advantageous part of that role? What is the Achilles heel to it? And who am I without it? And can I release the need to be that definition and allow myself the quanta of possibilities to see what my soul wants to express next?
Mm-hmm. Wonderfully said. And what I love about that is death is almost the great leveler. So wherever you are in life and whatever's going on, if you lose someone and someone that was close to you, that it almost necessitates that whole revisiting, who am I? You know, who am I without this person? Who, you know, just that whole question, who am I and what am I doing and what's important? And my experience with it was that all the little things that I had been thought I was concerned about, that was important to me, when death was at my doorstep, it's a wonderful opportunity to get to know yourself again. And it's almost so raw what is really important at the end of every day. For in each moment, it can become really clear, you know, just what's important. And in the busyness of everyday lives, we can forget that. So that's a gift that death can bring, that I don't know, it's like a little present. And and as part of the grieving process, such potential for personal development.
There was in one of the classes that I took, we did a really interesting exercise where we were broken up in groups of 5 or 6, and each person died. And we had a shamanic treatment where we could send them on soul flight afterward, close down their chakras, and literally send the soul out. And then you bring the soul back, obviously, because the person hasn't really died. But we were to cast who was going to be there when we died. We wrote our eulogy and we did, you know, this whole practice of it. My Lord, was it illuminating, because I realized even at the point of death, I was making sure everybody else was okay. I wasn't paying attention to myself at all. And I kept thinking, okay, I'm worried about them and I'm worried about them. And it was the best realization for me, because I thought, where am I in this? Why am I so focused on everybody else? They're going to figure it out. You know, what do I want? So it was the beginning of an evolution for me to see a very, very substantial shift that needed to happen within my own soul of how I was expressing myself. But it was lovely because it was hard for me to write my eulogy. It was hard for me to capture what I felt I had contributed or to give voice to that. That evolved over time because I did that practice a couple of times. But it also was interesting to have the moments to talk to the people I wanted, to realize who I wanted and if I wanted a lot of people or not very many people. And then the other people were kind of cast in the role of, I would tell them a little bit like, you're going to be my brother, or you're going to be my niece. And the odd thing is that they were inspired by the spirit world to say things that all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, it's kind of like family constellation work, where they would say things that were absolutely spot on that I needed to hear. So it really gave me the capture of much more quality within my life, but better balance within my relationships. So when that moment comes in my life, I possibly might have a different level of freedom and detachment from what I have done or haven't done.
That's really interesting. Like practicing death. It's almost like, there's a lot of potential there.
That's interesting. I had a friend, the very friend that got me involved in this, who we used to say she's trying on death. Hers was out of some fear, no doubt, but she would kind of find me wherever I was and say something like, and she was dying. I mean, she really at this point only had a couple of months left, but she was like, is it okay with you if I die tonight? I'm like, you know, and we would laugh about it, but I know it was her way of trying to get in there and figure out, kind of like you just said, where she is in this whole thing. Was she checking in with other people, somebody like me, is it okay? It's kind of like, is it okay if you come over at 11 o'clock for my death, but if you're not busy, I'll hold off,
Yeah. Yep.
So that kind of thing. And it was just an interesting thing. It happened a couple of times, and it gave us this really wonderful, and it was very organic. I didn't plan it. It was she that was really evaluating it. And as she got closer and closer, you could see a sense of, I wouldn't say necessarily calm, but something was changing for her. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what aging, having just turned the ripe old age of 39, I think that's what death gives us who are aging, because it's going to happen more and more. I see more and more when I went back to my reunions. I see there's more people on that memorial wall that have passed. There's more of my friends, or I get the message that says, oh my gosh, did you hear? And every time that happens, yes, as you said, Missy, there's sadness, but I kind of like if this is going to happen, because that's what most people say. I know I've talked to some of my family members who are older. They're like, I go to doctor's appointments and funerals. If that's going to happen, I'm putting the fun in funeral personally, because I love a social event and I love death. And like, seriously, like, what greater time to get deep and connected with people? And as I age, I really do welcome that. I mean, I don't want anybody to be hurt or anything like that, but it's all going to happen, however it's going to happen. I'm just very excited that we've all examined this a little bit more, and so that it won't come as this sucker punch every time, like it does with some people.
There's a mediumship. Thank you for sharing that, because it's such a gorgeous point, and I want to complement it with a little story that happened with a friend of mine who was equally dying, but from a mediumistic standpoint.
Oh, okay.
I always talk about people that aren't in physical form anymore as present, because to me they are. I talk to them a fair amount, so she's here as far as I'm concerned. I have a very dear friend named Judy who's in the spirit world. She's a pastor, or was the pastor of the spiritualist church in Santa Barbara. And she got sick all of a sudden. And I'd known her for a very short amount of time, but she's one of those indelible souls that, like, the minute you meet her, time just has no value. You've just known each other forever. And I just loved her tips to toes. So when I found out she was dying, it didn't make sense. She's a pastor. She's a spiritualist. I mean, come on. If anybody's going to deal with death well, this is our girl, right? So I'm driving up to San Francisco, and she pops up in the car sitting next to me and says to me, I don't know what to do. And I said, sorry about this. My phone is ringing through my computer. Love this. Wait a second.
Judy's calling.
Yes. Oh, isn't that hilarious? That's cute. See what I mean? Spirit world, thank you. And I give them permission to play with the room, so they're having fun. Thank you for noticing that. That was awesome. So she was sitting in the car with me, and she said, I don't know what to do. And I said, what do you mean you don't know what to do? She goes, I don't know if I should stay or if I should go. And I said, Judy, for God's sakes, you've got the love of your life. You've got a church that loves you. Your mediumship is blooming. Things are absolutely spectacular. What, hey, girl, come on. So what ended up happening was she literally kind of gave me this impression, like, I think I'm going to, she wasn't sure what she was going to do. Well, she died a week later.
So stay or go, you were asking her. Okay.
Yeah, and she ended up dying a week later. And it really, I was pissed at her. I was so mad because I didn't get it. But I realized
she didn't take your advice.
Oh, I know. Well, heck, I'm so human. I'm the first person to admit I love this work, but, I can be human.
No, not human.
But, I know. I'm not human. So anyway, but what I realized was she was giving me this amazing gift, because what she was doing was she was helping me understand that there's a choice in death. I really appreciated the fact that she did that. And then I shared it with the church. that she had done that, because I think it was important for them to know that even though her death was actually quick, that there was an awareness in her soul that she could stay if she wanted to, but she chose not to for whatever reason. And I think if we were more soul-centered, I think if we were more connected with the spirit world on a regular basis, those conversations, the spirit world's calling again, that's hilarious.
She may have another message for you.
I think if we were aware of those particular situations, and I think if we were aware of the spirit world, we would be having those conversations. We would know when people were cuspy, and it wouldn't come as such a surprise. But I think we choose not to have that personal spiritual connection, which is why I'm such a proponent for people exploring their souls. Because my life is so different listening to the spirit world. Look, it helped me with Judy. Helped me completely with Judy.
And you know, it's so interesting too that you say, I love that you say you were pissed, because she gave you this opportunity to say, and guess what, Miss Medium Self, that it doesn't always look, it like, just because, I think you should stick around means you should stick around, right?
Yeah, I was A1 selfish on wanting her to stay. And there was a lot of us that were selfish about wanting her to stay. Yeah. But I so appreciated it too, because it also gave me that awareness, as it did the church, that she was at peace with what happened. Mm-hmm. There was some sort of a detachment that was happening to her, for her to be in a place, in a space where she could let go of the physical world. And she's so present for everybody. So they haven't really, they've experienced a mourning. And I will say this about mediums, because it may sound anti-medium sort of. So it's really important for people to grieve. Mm-hmm. And you can't keep going to a medium and talking to your loved one, because that doesn't always allow you the opportunity to grieve the individual. That is part of the soul expression walking this earth. It's lovely to touch in and to find out that you're doing well and they know the things that are transpiring in your life. But equally, you need to have that time to just darn miss the person. I think I have missed Judy more than any individual that I can think of in a long time. And it's astounded me. But I think it's also an opportunity, because I deal with grief and death so much, to actually facilitate some of the feeling that I probably have within my soul that I might hold somehow just in the work.
Perfect.
Thank you, Austyn. We're coming up to the top of the hour, but there's something else I wanted you to touch on before we leave, and that's the idea of sacred spaces and tributes, and how this can be a key component to healthy grieving. Absolutely.
Much in the same tone as how we started the show, so here's our full circle piece of going back to Day of the Dead. They literally allow, I think people have a problem sometimes with the word altar, because it has religious connotations. All it is a sacred space. It's a sacred space for you to honor how that soul had an effect. I love circles. I work in circles. I just think, I've got one behind me. I love them because it's that whole idea of immortality, continuity, and everything. Create a space where you can create a circle around it, and put within that place and space things that are meaningful to you, of the loved one that you experience. You can equally do this outside, which is really fun. It can be a picture, it can be objects, it can be a drawing, it can be a note written to them. It can be so many different things. Within the house, it's great to have a place, because I do it every year at this time of year. It just allows me to recognize like how these people touched me, to remind myself, oh my goodness, it's been like 3 years since that person died, and notice how my own grief is a little different. But also it's just an opportunity to like have a soul-to-soul conversation with them, thank them for what they've done. And then if you do it outside, what's cool is if it's in your garden or someplace that you can monitor, or even in a pot, you can do that if you live in an apartment. Nature will have a way of playing with the elements a little bit. And then you'll have an awareness of the spirit world kind of coming in and playing with it as well. So I love adding that extra thing, just like your phone calls today, of coming in to just begin to let you know that their presence is there. So I think that's one way you can do it. It can be also getting a group together. It can be Thanksgiving or the holidays and talking about your loved ones with your family, setting a seat at the table for them and everybody recognizing something they loved about them, or if it was an ornery person, something that really was a challenge for them to work through. But the memory, I can't tell you how much the spirit world loves being remembered, because especially people that have done genealogy work, and I'll be reading for somebody, I can go up like 4 or 5 generations in the past, and they're so grateful because they're just being remembered. So really, they know you're doing it, and you're not disturbing them. You're just allowing them to touch into this world, and it's equally delightful for them.
Thank you, Austyn. It's yeah, as always, I feel kind of sparkly and tingly, and just like there's, for me personally, there's been thoughts of people who have passed during this conversation, and it's awakened many parts of me that that may be sleeping when I don't think of them. So that's a real treat. And maybe as a parting thought, we can encourage our viewers as we come up to this Day of the Dead and this American Hallmark holiday, that we can always think about people who aren't here, and that's maybe one of the greatest way to pay tribute to them and to keep them alive in our life, and to feel like we're it's not a loss, but it's you know, they were with us here on earth walking the path, and we were blessed to have an association with them that left that energy imprint with us. So thank you.
Lovely. Yes. Austyn, is there anything else you want to share as we close out and say goodbye to you? But we know it's not forever, because you are one hell of a chickie, and we love hanging out with you. Another.
Yay. Can I be an honorary chick?
Yes, you can.
Oh yeah.
I want to
yeah,
switch,
baby.
I think it's just bringing in with Halloween. I mean, we're all about candy on Halloween, but the idea of it is really this idea that the worlds are very close to each other. So take an opportunity, if you can, to just even in your mind, it doesn't have to be so formal, but just be grateful to the people that have been part of your life and touch your soul, because there's reasons they have. They're expanding your conversation, and so just keep talking to them. They're so pleased to be remembered.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Nice.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
We're going to wrap up, and we'll see you next time, and we'll continue our grief series. Sorry about that. I am sorry that I'm speaking over you, but you are all the way in the Arctic, girl. So,
I just wanted to say thank you both so very much for this honor. I really appreciate it. And Patty, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Let's stave off death a little bit longer, but I'm feeling good.
Right on. Everyone, bye for now. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Stay tuned. Lots of great stuff coming up.
All right. Take care.